Let's make a movie together. In this series, you and I will work together to create a story for a feature film. So far, we have chosen the genre, a concept, the protagonist, the antagonist, the setting, and we have also talked about sequence 1 and 2. In the previous video, we worked on sequences 3 and 4, and today we're going to be working on sequences 5 and 6. So stick around until the end of the video and I'll give you the instructions for the next step in this series. So as mentioned, today we are going to be working on sequences 5 and 6 for this film. If you want to see some of the details we've made so far, I will put a lot of this in the description below. For those of you who aren't familiar, or maybe you're new to this series, we are using the 8-sequence story structure, and it's simply just something that helps us break down the story of a feature film into separate sections. And you can watch my other video on the 8-sequence story structure whenever you like to get a bit more details on that one. I'm going to go into the previous video and I'm going to read through some of your suggestions for the next part in this story. As I've said in other videos, there's quite a lot of reading to do, so obviously I've got your things to read and then I've got a bunch of other stuff written down in notes, so I'll mostly be reading off of here. So on the previous video, I crafted most of sequence 3 and then I asked you guys to create sequence 4. So let's have a look at what you've done. Silhouette6828 says, now that Leo is stuck in the town and decided to help solve the murder, he has his first interactions with Alex. They don't get along though, and I think Alex wants them to get along. Leo just wants to leave and put the past behind him. They have a tension between them as Alex is in charge of the case, but Leo is more experienced. Alex suggests they investigate the 2 murders separately and reconvene with what they've found. Leo, knowing that Harriet's body was found closest to the place he's afraid of, and knowing he wouldn't be able to notice everything, decides to investigate the newer body. As Alex investigates, he may find ancient texts or runes cut into where the body was injured. Maybe Harriet's eyes were removed because she gazed at her killer in the dark. Seeing this, Alex decides to go to the newly discovered the ruins. Leo is faced with a similar scene upon investigating the surroundings. He realizes the shadows in the area seem darker despite the shining sun. Most people wouldn't realize the difference, but with Leo's fear of the dark, he realizes quickly. Alex at the ruins meets with the people who are researching them and shows them pictures of texts on the body. From here, we may learn what the purpose of the relic is. Maybe the mining history of the town goes back further than they thought. Maybe even the first cave dwellers in the area dug deeper and deeper as if afraid of the sun. They may have worshipped the dark and sought to create something to harness it or deepen it. Thus, the relic was created. However, as with most things, there is a cost. It would steal your sight. The cave dwellers, because they almost constantly lived in darkness anyways, thought this a fair price to harness such great power. However, soon the power grew too much and too concentrated, and the relic began taking lives, imprinting a warning onto its victims. And that's all I got for the moment. Yeah, I definitely like the idea of these, these cave dwellers that sort of worship darkness, and the fact that, they pay the price with blindness, and I think it's kind of cool that they don't mind because they live in darkness anyway. You guys sort of commented a bit in this one with a couple of good things to keep in mind. Acting Passion Run said may need to be careful not to create a similarity to Stephen King's Desperation with the historic part. Also, that is set in a mining town. And then Benevolent Hedonist said, I just watched Desperation and I agree that there are too many similarities in this script so far. Well picked up. Thank you for that one, Ron. I have not seen Desperation, so that's one good reason why we're all kind of working on this project together. Now it's good that we know that there is a film that we need to be aware of so that going forward we can try to create a few differences, and with our story, we've created all these details, but at any point, if we realize that something's not working, we can go in and we can change it, So we were saying that ours is a mining town, but it doesn't need to be a mining town, There can still be these ancient cave dweller miner people, this modern day town doesn't need to be centered around mining. Acting Passion Ron also said, I think he is compelled by his memory to go to the grave, and perhaps he feels a need for redemption for not saving her. He wants to talk to her, hence compelled to go there. Yeah, so I'm perfectly happy to go with that approach. I think that makes sense. You know, he hasn't been in the town for a long time and missing his daughter, and this is the first chance in quite some time that he would have to actually, you know, speak with her. And then finally, we have the benevolent hedonist with a very long contribution, which I think is fantastic. I even like that I can see that in some of this, you've even started writing out some actual dialogue for these scenes. Fantastic. Having watched Desperation, I think our movie needs to concentrate more on the psychological aspects and less on the gruesome murders. After all, we are not supposed to be writing a slash and splatter flick. This movie should be mainly about trauma, confrontation, reconciliation, and recovery, albeit in a dark, dangerous, and violent context. Hence, there should be lots of expose of people's thoughts, motivations, and emotions, and we should create images in the audience's imagination rather than create explicit, horrific images on screen. Yeah, it's much harder, but much more impressive if you can get it to work. That first part, I think, is a good idea with the horrific murders. You know, perhaps they can still totally happen, but it might be a fun style choice if we never actually show them, you know? So perhaps at one of these crime scenes, all we do see is the character's reaction to what they are seeing, and it's up to us to try to piece together what that might be, and it's up to our own imagination to try to figure out what it is that they are looking at. So, scene suggestions. Alex is in shock when Leo catches up with him at the second murder scene. Leo even holds Alex's arm to steady him as he staggers out from the murder site. There was so much blood. How could a person do that to someone? Alex asks rhetorically. Even the forensic team and the local doctor, acting as forensic pathologists, are visibly shaken by what they find. More horrific than the worst road accident, comments the doctor. Leo shows sincere concern for Alex, and the ice between them begins to melt. It is revealed that Leo was once a police officer in the town, maybe a deputy just like Alex. Leo takes a look at the bloody scene, but we only see the reaction of incredulous horror on his face. This is a challenge for the actors, but the audience's imagination, properly stimulated, should be more effective than any explicit special effects, blood and guts montage. I think that's a great idea. Yes, definitely. Which can be used later at a climactic moment, if at all. Think Alfred Hitchcock rather than Eli Roth. Leo sees Alex is okay before leaving the scene to the forensic team. It's evening already, but he must visit the person who told him about seeing his daughter. This is his ex-wife, his daughter's mother, who now lives with her father in the town. They haven't seen each other for 10 years since Leo left the town. Leo gets a cold reception from his ex-father-in-law, which sets a tense, strained atmosphere for the scene. The older man has not forgiven Leo for divorcing his daughter and also somehow seems to hold Leo responsible for his granddaughter's death. He lets Leo in with a warning not to upset his daughter, hinting that Leo's ex is unstable. Leo's ex barely looks him in the eye as they talk in sad, low tones about the past and recent tragedies. It is revealed that Leo's guilt and trauma from his daughter's death made living in the town unbearable for him, whereas his ex could not bear to leave the town because that felt to her that she would be deserting their child. Eventually, Leo had applied for a job in the city police force and they had divorced unhappily, but without rancor. This story should be as much about Leo's reconciliation with his past as it is about the murder investigation. Again, I think, yes, definitely. I couldn't believe it was really you on the phone. How did you get my number? Says Leo, trying to gently broach the sensitive subject of their daughter's sighting. His ex is increasingly distraught and desperate for some affirmation from him. His ex replies, I rang your office. I had to tell you what I'd seen. Only you could understand what it's like to see her, just like she was back then. She was our little girl. No one else would feel the same. No one loved her like we did. And other people, they don't believe me. They think I'm delusional, depressed, crazy. even my father. But you believe me, don't you, Leo? You used to know me so well. You can tell, can't you? You know I'm not lying. And I'm not crazy, don't you, Leo? Leo's ex proceeds to describe her encounter with the daughter's ghost. Some fact about one of the murders is included, which his ex should not have known unless she had been there. So was the ex involved in the murders, or did she see a ghost? At this point, we, the audience, don't know. Leo placates her and reassures her, but it's not clear to the audience whether he is completely sincere in this or just humoring her so as not to upset her further. Perhaps Leo is serious and will reconcile with his ex for a happily ever after ending, or maybe he'll just return to the city when the case is finished, newly assured that he was right to leave the town, its people, and the past behind him. Meanwhile, Alex has recovered from his shock and embarrassment and has tracked down the location of the relic, along with some mythology about its nature and history, which indicates that it is indeed related to the murders somehow. This info can come from research in a library, or for some knowledgeable character who could be an archaeologist, or perhaps a local indigenous elder citing an almost forgotten verbal history of their ancestors, illustrating that the relic comes from a mysterious, violent, and supernatural era. Alex rashly goes ahead to discover the relic in an ancient tunnel only to fall under its influence. He doesn't let Leo know what he's doing because he's trying to make up for his apparent weakness at the crime scene earlier. In his youthful inexperience, he's trying to prove himself capable and independent. He hasn't learned that everyone needs help, everyone has moments of weakness, etc. And this sets up the final confrontation wherein Leo finds and rescues Alex and destroys or confines the relic along with its mysterious powers. But that's probably jumping ahead to a later sequence. Lots of information in that contribution as well as the other ones. So let's start going through what it is that we have so far and see what we need to do next. Based on some of those contributions, I think that Leo can definitely go and see his ex-wife. I think that could definitely be an important character to introduce to the story. If she's the one who gave him the call about spotting their daughter, then it might be good to put this meeting somewhere towards the start of the film during the sequence where Leo first arrives at the town. It's definitely a great idea to focus less on the gruesome murder, as we were saying, and more on the character's psyche. We would more so focus on the person's reaction to something happening rather than showing the blood and the gore and all that. As I mentioned, we are using the 8-sequence story structure. I'm just going to quickly go through a quick summary of how the eight sequences work for a psychological thriller so that you can get a better idea of what we have done so far and also give you a few hints of what's to come. In a psychological thriller, sequence 1 is the setup. This is where we introduce the protagonists, their ordinary world, and the initial status quo. This is where we would establish professions and proficiencies, relationships, and any internal struggles the protagonist may have. In a psychological thriller, the setup may include hints or foreshadow the psychological turmoil to come. Sequence 2 is the conflict introduction. Here, you'll introduce the central conflict. In a psychological thriller, this could be a mysterious event, a disturbing revelation, or the emergence of a dangerous antagonist. It should unsettle the protagonist and challenge their perceptions of reality. Sequence 3 is the rising tension as the protagonist, now locked into the situation, delves deeper into the conflict. They may uncover clues and encounter obstacles. The antagonist's presence becomes more pronounced, pushing the protagonist to question their sanity and their morality. Sequence 4 usually features some of the more thrilling and fun moments to watch in the film, which then ends with the midpoint reversal. So this is a significant twist or a revelation that shifts the direction of the story. The protagonist's original goal is now replaced with a far more important goal or a new goal. This could involve a betrayal, a setback, a revelation that changes the protagonist's understanding of the conflict. For a psychological thriller, this often involves major psychological and emotional upheaval for the protagonist. So basically, at the end of sequence 4, which is pretty much right in the middle of the film, everything is turned on its head. And now we have a new objective. Sequence 5, which is what we'll be working on today, is escalating threats. So now with a new objective, the protagonist must face a whole new level of threats. The stakes are raised as the antagonist's actions become more menacing. Then sequence 6, which we are also going to be working on today, is the dark night of the soul. Here is where we push the protagonist to their lowest point. They confront their deepest fears and flaws, a moment of despair, of self-doubt, or moral crisis, and they may once again question their own sanity and integrity. Moving on to the final 2 sequences, sequence 7 is the final confrontation, otherwise known as the climax of the film, where everything culminates into one big conclusion, whether successful or not. In this genre, it could involve a psychological battle of wits, a physical struggle, or some kind of combination of both. Finally, sequence 8 is where we finally wrap everything up. The protagonist might find closure and overcomes their inner demons or answers their big question in life. For a psychological thriller, the resolution may leave unanswered questions, lingering doubts, adding ambiguity and unease. So the film will end, but we might not necessarily know whether or not the problem was actually solved. So once again, let's go through and do a rough summary of what it is that we have actually come up with so far for the first few sequences. So sequence 1 features Leo living his life in the city as a detective. He is nearing retirement and struggles with his crippling fear of the dark. During this sequence, he sees glimpses of his daughter's face in strangers. He encounters moments with intense shadows surrounding him. It also includes a phone call coming from his original home, which is a small town where there has been a gruesome murder, but more importantly, a sudden sighting of his daughter, who was missing and presumed dead many years ago. Sequence 2 is when Leo hesitantly returns to the town in hopes that the sighting was real, despite it being seemingly impossible. While there, we are introduced to new characters such as Alex, a young and inexperienced officer who now suddenly finds himself in charge after his former boss was the body found mangled just outside of town. This sequence finishes with another murder where Leo was the only one sighted and now the main suspect. Leo is now unable to leave the town and decides to stay in order to solve the mystery and clear his name, as well as that slim chance of finding his long-lost daughter. Sequence 3, focusing on Leo and Alex facing conflict between them and continuing with separate investigations. Moments that force Leo into darkened rooms despite being the middle of the day, only to be saved by his fear of the dark, while Alex searched and finds clues toward the ancient artifact that has a connection to the mystery. This sequence might end with both characters coming together with their discoveries, hesitantly agreeing to work together. You were then tasked to come up with the events of sequence 4, which is what I just read earlier. Here is one way that maybe this can be interpreted. So the events of sequence 3 poke at Leo's fears and shake him, leading to a potential moment of weakness where Alex and Leo finally begin to let their barriers down and work together. Coming together with their new information, Leo perhaps returns to his ex-wife one more time. With fragmented theories, Leo then discovers that he must indeed go to the one place he is afraid to go. And in order to do so, he desperately needs Alex's help. I think that perhaps Leo notices the abnormalities in the shadows and reveals what is happening to Alex. Perhaps this sequence can include going to the bad place. With Alex's help, they manage to get deep enough to discover something about the ancient cave dwellers, and maybe some clues that talk about their fear of the sun and their shadow-worshipping cult. They see images of the artifact. The danger possibly starts when Leo comes into direct contact with the actual artifact itself, something he maybe doesn't actually find in the evil place, but somehow takes it out of maybe even just his own jacket pocket, or perhaps finds it in Alex's coat pocket, you know, just something that starts to make us question who it is that's actually the antagonist. Perhaps the ghost of Leo's daughter, or just a part of Leo's psyche, helps them escape before the evil shadow takes control of Leo's hidden alter ego. Then somehow the end of sequence 4 ends with the midpoint reversal where something big and shocking is revealed and suddenly Leo's main objective is turned on its head. So this midpoint reversal could be all kinds of things. So maybe at the end of sequence 4, this ancient shadow thing goes inside of Leo and becomes part of him. Maybe he knows about it, maybe he doesn't, and it just kind of shifts the next stage of the story. They're trying to figure out what's going on, and now he's directly part of it. I'm really just saying these things off the top of my head, but at the end of sequence 4, something happens to just turn everything around. Now for today's video, I'm going to give you a rough description of sequence 5 and 6, and then the next part of this series, I want you to flesh out in more detail both of these sequences. Sequence 5, something bad happens directly to Leo. Something dangerous, perhaps he sees his daughter, something bad happens. After whatever happens, Leo refuses to go any deeper and attempts to leave. Then at this stage realizes for some reason he is literally unable to do so. The antagonist's actions become more menacing and create a new level of conflict for our protagonist. As a reminder, we decided that our antagonist is a combination of a corrupt alter ego of our protagonist and another character being controlled or affected by some kind of supernatural dark presence. So at the end of sequence 4, if this dark presence is now inside of Leo, then perhaps he is unable to leave because 1, it won't let him, but also if he does, he's only going to be allowing it to spread further into the world. Again, I'm just saying these things off the top of my head. If you have something better, absolutely let me know in the comments. As for sequence 6 is where something big happens. At the end of the film, if our protagonist wins, then sequence 6 should be where they have their biggest loss. If they lose in the end, then sequence 6 is where they should have their greatest victory, which also sometimes is set up as a false ending. At this point, I would suggest that it would likely feature a significant death, which raises the stakes and shows us what could potentially happen to our protagonist if they fail. At this stage, I'd say either the ex-wife or Alex, but feel free to come up with other ideas of how sequence 6 could be the lowest low for Leo. Making sequence 6 as devastating as possible will make the climax of the film more impactful. So Leo must face his deepest fear and question his own sanity and integrity. Perhaps this shadow thing is inside of him, and perhaps it is indeed him that directly kills one of these people that are important to him. Again, off the top of my head, let me know if you come up with anything better. For sequence 5 and 6, I want you to flesh them out in more details. Put your suggestions in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.